So guys, it's time for exercise 2. And in this exercise, we're going to practice the skills that we've learned in this section. So the first thing I'd like you to do is create a template. So I'd like you to search for the keyword invoice in the template library. I'd like you to open one of the invoice templates, and I'll leave it up to you to decide which one you want to open. And I'd like you to save it as invoice template with the correct template file extension. And I want you to make sure that you save it to the default templates folder. Once you've done that, I'd like you to create a new blank workbook. I'd like you to rename Sheet 1 to Summary and then add 3 more worksheets. And then rename each of those worksheets to Sales Data, Calculations and Charts. Next, we're going to practice entering data into our worksheets. So on the Sales Data worksheet, in cell A1, I'd like you to type in a title that says Sales Data for 2020. I'd like you to format that title, so make sure that the font size is 14 points and it's in bold. Then, in cells A3 to C3, I'd like you to enter the headings Month, Revenue and Profit. And then in cell A4, enter the word Jan. I'd then like you to use the fill handle to copy down the months February and March. And then finally, I'd just like you to add some values for revenue and profit like I have in the screenshot. And then the final thing we need to do for this exercise is simply save this Excel workbook. So I'd like you to create a folder on your desktop and name it Excel Practice Files. And then save the workbook as Exercise 02 Practice. That's it, guys. If you'd like to see my answer, then please keep watching. So the first thing we need to do here is search for an invoice template in the template library. So let's go to File and down to New. I'm going to scroll down to my templates, and in the search box, I'm going to type in invoice and hit enter. Now, I didn't mind which one of these you chose, so I'm just going to choose this first one just here. Let's double click to open it up and load it into Excel. Next, I asked you to save this as a template file into the default templates folder. So we're going to say File, Save As. Let's click on Browse, and remember we need to change the Save As type to an Excel template. Now that is automatically going to jump us across to the correct folder, and I'm just going to call this invoice_template and click on Save. Next, I asked you to create a brand new blank workbook, so Control N to do that. We're going to rename Sheet 1 to Summary, so we can double click and type in the word Summary. I then asked you to add 3 more sheets, so let's click the plus once, twice, 3 times, and then rename these worksheets to Sales Data, Calculations, and the final one is going to be Charts. We're then going to switch to the Sales Data tab, and in cell A1 we're going to add a title. So this is Sales Data for 2020. We're going to format this font so that it is 14 points and also bold. And then in cells A3 to C3, we're going to type in some headings: Month, Revenue, and Profit. And then underneath, we're going to type the word Jan, Control Enter to stay in the same cell, and I'm going to use my autofill handle just to fill down February and March. I then asked you just to enter some numbers into the revenue and profit fields. And again, I don't really mind what numbers you entered in here. And just to finish this off, I'm going to give these headings a bit of bold formatting, and we're also going to apply a background fill. Next, I asked you to create a folder on your desktop and call it Excel Practice Files. So all we need to do here is right-click our mouse, go to New and Folder. We'll call this Excel Practice Files and hit Enter. And then we're going to save this file into that folder. So let's go to Browse, to our desktop and open up that new folder. And I'm going to call this exercise 02 underscore practice and click on the save button. When you're learning Excel is how you can make different selections in your worksheet. Now for this example, we're going to switch to another workbook that contains a lot more data. Now before we do that, let's just very quickly give my first workbook a save. So I'm going to press Control S just to save those changes. So now what we're going to do is we're going to flip across to a larger data set that contains sales data. And you'll find this file saved in the Course Files folder. Now notice here, this is standard sales data. We have some column headings running across the top, and then we have our data. And this data set is reasonably large, at least a lot larger than the ones that we've been working on in previous lessons. And if I press Control down arrow, as we know, that jumps us to the last row of our data, you can see that I have just over 21,500 rows. Control up arrow is going to jump me to the top. Also remember, when it comes to navigating, if I press Control right arrow, it's going to jump me to the last column of data, and Control right arrow will jump me to the first column. Now there are lots of different ways that you can make selections in Excel. And a basic cell selection would be simply clicking on a cell in our worksheet. If we want to select more than one cell, we can simply click and drag our mouse to select the cell range that we're interested in. So maybe I want to apply some formatting to the column headings in this worksheet. I can make my selection just by clicking and dragging. And then I can go up to my font formatting area. I'm going to click the font color drop down and I'm going to change this to a red font. So cell selections are very straightforward. Simply click, drag to make your selection. Now notice here, all of the selections that I've been making using this method are cells that are all next to each other. What about if I want to select what we call non-contiguous cells, so cells that aren't next to each other? Well, what I could do here is select the first few cells, hold down my Control key and then make another selection, hold down my Control key again and make another selection, and just keep doing that. So the addition of the Control key when you're selecting cells will allow you to select cells which aren't necessarily next to each other. And if I wanted to apply formatting to all of these cells, for example bold, I can simply click bold and I get the effect that I want. Now I don't want these to be in bold, so let's just toggle our bold back off. Now what about if I want to make a selection in my worksheet of an entire column of data? So for example, in column H, where we have some sales figures, I have some numbers. They're currently unformatted, as in they don't have any currency symbols or decimal places or anything like that. What about if I want to change the format of all of the sales figures in here? Do I really want to be clicking and dragging my mouse down 27,000 rows in order to select this cell range? Well, no, not really. It's not the most time-efficient way to do this. What I could do instead is click in the first cell, H2, and press the keyboard shortcut Control-Shift down arrow, and that's going to select every cell downwards that I have in my data set. Now that I've made that selection, I can simply go in and apply some currency formatting. And we haven't really spoken a great deal about number formatting so far in this course. So I am going to jump ahead very slightly here. So just above in this number group, I can click the drop down and I'm going to say that I want this formatted as a currency. And you can see how that affects those numbers. So don't forget that very useful keyboard shortcut of Control-Shift down arrow to make a selection of all of the data in the column. Now so far we've been very much focused on making cell selections. But cell selections aren't the only things that we can select when we're working in Excel. For example, maybe I want to make a column selection, or maybe I want to select an entire row. So this is very straightforward. If I want to select a column, I can simply hover my mouse over the top of the column where we have the letter. Notice that I get a little black downward facing arrow, and if I click, that is going to select the entire column. And I mean it's going to select the entire column, as in it's going to select every single cell in that column all the way down to the bottom of the workbook. If I want to select multiple columns, again, I can simply drag my mouse across to make multiple selections. If I want to select columns that aren't next to each other, again, I just add in that Control key when I click. And the same works for making row selections. I can hover my mouse over the row until I get the right pointing black arrow. I can click to select one row. I can click and drag to select multiple rows, or I can add in that Control key to select non-contiguous rows. It's also worth noting that you can make selections just using your keyboard. So if I'm clicked in cell A2 and I want to select all of the data in this particular row, if I hold down Shift and then use my arrow keys, it's going to allow me to select that data. If I keep Shift held down and use my down arrow key, it's going to go down the rows. I can use my up arrow to refine my selection further. And then the final thing that's worth pointing out about making selections is Select All. And Select All functions differently depending on where you're clicked in your worksheet. So if I'm clicked within my data and I press Control A, which is the keyboard shortcut for Select All, it's going to select all of the data that it finds surrounding where I'm currently clicked. Now, if I was clicked on a blank cell somewhere else in the worksheet, so not within my actual data, and I press Control A, it's going to select every single cell in my worksheet. Now, I find myself using Control A inside my data all the time. If I want to format this data as a table, or maybe I want to add borders or something like that, I'll find myself making this selection, and then from there I can go up and maybe add a border around the outside of every single cell. It just makes this entire process a lot quicker. So that is how you can make basic cell, row, and column selections when you're working in your worksheets.